I don't remember these reeds being so tall. Everything keeps growing. Some little critter there jumped from one branch to another. I couldn't make out what it was. Good morning, everybody. We're back to hazy mornings. Today we have a continuation of both stories from yesterday. The conversation between Peter and the people after the man who was completely disabled is cured and is running around. The word that described him before was crippled. And there's a very powerful conversation. Very determined Peter, very convinced Peter, teaching clearly. With great authority. But when we go back to the encounter where Peter is also present, obviously in a very prominent place on the day of the resurrection, and the disciples have come back from Emmaus. Now they get to tell their story, because when they came back they thought they could dominate the attention, but actually when they got back there were so many more people had much more attention. In the community itself, they were bursting with joy to tell their story of having seen Jesus. So now the Emmaus people tell their story, and with that Jesus appears again. And look at all the words that are used to describe their reactions. 4 words. Even terrified. Like they're shocked. They can't figure it out. And in the 50 days in between, from that moment to Pentecost, a major process has happened. It wasn't like they went from frozen cold to boiling hot. The human being needs time to deal with experience, to process experience, to take it in, to comprehend to some measure, to ponder, to correlate with other things, trying to figure it out, especially when it's something very new, of extraordinary consequence. Your leader who was crucified, for whom you had left everything. See the new growth alongside the old. And now he's risen from the dead. And then all the expectation, all the teaching about the scriptures. A lot of meditation, reflection, consideration. Sometimes a tragedy happens in a family and people try to trace the steps of how it came to be like that. And here we have gone through the tragedy and coming out on the other side in the extraordinary revelation of the resurrection, when we had thought that everything was finished in the disaster. And then to start threading all the scriptures and realize, wow, this was the plan from the beginning. This plan is even in nature, where this fruit can fall into the ground and bring forth a whole new bush, a whole new shrub, a whole new tree. Imagine the little acorn that brings about an oak tree, and the little seed that brings about this eucalyptus tree. And you couldn't tell at a distance, or even close up, that that seed could become the tree. We know by experience that it does, but the evidence visually is not there. This also leads to great humility, because it's all a gift. And since we have our difficulties and our doubts and our questions on our path of growth, new phases of growth, then we can have understanding for those who still are going along this path, who still are finding their way. But it is fascinating to see Peter, with all his impetuosity and all his flaws, character flaws, temperamental rushes, now how he is so stable leading. And yet we know that that stability will be tested all the way through to his death. But it's good to see these significant figures of the faith story, like Abraham and Moses and the prophets and the apostles, Mary Magdalene especially. There's a whole growth pattern. And that speaks volumes for us. I invite you to compare those readings, contrast them, see how Peter grows It's one of the exercises we used to do in high school with studying theatre, the works of Shakespeare, to see how a character developed during the story throughout the play. And we used to have to be able to give the quotations to show that. Wow, look at how laden this is with fruit. It's at its peak. Amazing. Wow. The whole thing, the whole way through. May you be laden with fruit as you conclude your life, when that day comes, that we will have grown in the presence of the Almighty, hearing His words, seeing His works, His marvelous deeds, that we proclaim to the nations. God bless you. See you later, alligators.